The opulent Martinez mansion stood like a gleaming fortress atop the highest hill in the exclusive Lomas de Chapultepec neighborhood of Mexico City. Its pristine white walls and perfectly manicured gardens were a testament to the wealth and power of its owner, Eduardo Martinez. But behind the grand facade, a storm of emotions was brewing, threatening to shatter the carefully maintained illusion of perfection. Sofia Hernandez stood at the wrought iron gates, her heart pounding in her chest. The young woman's delicate features were etched with determination, her long dark hair whipping in the wind as she pressed the intercom button. In her trembling hands, she clutched a worn leather-bound book, the key to unraveling a mystery that had haunted these halls for years. "Yes," came the curt response from the security guard. Sofia took a deep breath. "I'm here to see Mr. Martinez. It's urgent." There was a pause, then a gruff reply. "Mr. Martinez isn't expecting any visitors. Please leave the premises." "Tell him it's Sofia," she insisted, her voice quavering slightly. "Sofia Hernandez. And tell him I have what he's been searching for." Inside the mansion, Eduardo Martinez sat in his study, surrounded by the trappings of his considerable wealth. At 55, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that only added to his distinguished appearance. But his dark eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were clouded with a perpetual sadness that not even his billions could erase. His gaze wandered, as it often did, to the ornate silver frame on his desk. The photograph within showed a stunningly beautiful woman with eyes that sparkled with life and laughter. Clara. His beloved wife, taken from him far too soon. 5 years had passed since her tragic death, but the pain remained as fresh as if it were yesterday. A gentle knock on the door pulled Eduardo from his reverie. "Come in," he called out, his voice rough with emotion. His trusted butler, Javier, entered the room with a look of apprehension. "Señor Martinez, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a young woman at the gate. She says her name is Sofia Hernandez, and that she has something you've been searching for." Eduardo's eyebrows furrowed in confusion, then shot up in recognition. "Sofia? The maid we dismissed 3 years ago?" Javier nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. That's the one." A whirlwind of emotions crossed Eduardo's face, surprise, anger, and beneath it all, a flicker of hope. "What could she possibly have that I've been searching for?" he muttered, more to himself than to Javier. Against his better judgment, curiosity won out. "Let her in," he commanded, rising from his chair. "But have security escort her directly to me." Minutes later, Sofia stood in the doorway of Eduardo's study, her eyes wide as she took in the familiar surroundings. She looked older than her 28 years, the weight of secrets aging her beyond her time. Her simple dress and worn shoes stood in stark contrast to the luxury around her, but she held herself with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. Eduardo's gaze locked onto the book in her hands, his heart skipping a beat as recognition dawned. "Is that," he whispered, unable to finish the sentence. Sofia nodded, her voice soft but steady. "Yes, Mr. Martinez. It's Mrs. Clara's diary." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Eduardo stared at the leather-bound journal. Clara's diary, the one possession of hers that had mysteriously vanished after her death. The one thing he had searched for tirelessly, hoping it would give him some insight into her final days, some closure to the gaping wound in his heart. "How did you get this?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "Why did you take it? Why are you bringing it back now?" Sofia flinched at his tone but stood her ground. "I didn't take it, Mr. Martinez. I found it. And I've spent the last 3 years trying to understand why Mrs. Clara hid it where she did. I've come back because what's written in these pages changes everything. About Mrs. Clara, about her death, and about me." Eduardo's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What are you talking about? What could possibly be in that diary that would change anything?" With trembling hands, Sofia opened the diary to a marked page and began to read aloud. "My dearest Sofia, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. There are things you need to know, truths that I've kept hidden for far too long. Your real identity, the circumstances of your birth, the danger that surrounds us, it's all connected. Trust no one, not even Eduardo. Find the truth, my darling girl, and know that I have always loved you as my own. The color drained from Eduardo's face as the implications of Clara's words sank in. He staggered back, gripping the edge of his desk for support. What is the meaning of this? He choked out. Sofia closed the diary, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mr. Martinez, there's so much more. Clara wasn't just my employer. She was my mother. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap, charged with the potential to destroy everything Eduardo thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and the woman he had loved so deeply. As Eduardo struggled to process this earth-shattering news, Sofia continued, her voice gaining strength. But that's not all. The diary, it suggests that Mrs. Clara's death wasn't an accident. She believed someone was trying to silence her, to keep her from revealing a terrible secret. Eduardo's mind reeled, unable to reconcile the loving, perfect image of Clara he had held on to for so long with these new, shocking revelations. How could Clara have had a daughter he knew nothing about? And if her death wasn't an accident, then who? He growled, his grief quickly giving way to a burning need for answers. Who would want to harm Clara? Sofia shook her head, her expression a mix of fear and determination. I don't know. That's why I'm here. I've spent years trying to piece together the clues, but I can't do it alone. Mrs. Clara, my mother, she trusted you, Mr. Martinez. Despite her warnings, I believe we need to work together to uncover the truth. Eduardo paced the room like a caged lion, his emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to throw Sofia out, to dismiss her claims as lies or the ravings of a disgruntled ex-employee. But the diary. Clara's words. They rang with an authenticity he couldn't deny. He turned to face Sofia, really looking at her for the first time. How had he never noticed before? The shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin, they were so like Clara's. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him, anger at the deception, grief for the years lost, and a strange, reluctant tenderness for this young woman who might be the last living connection to his beloved wife. Why should I believe you? He asked, his voice hoarse. Why should I trust anything you say? Sofia met his gaze unflinchingly. Because the truth is in these pages, Mr. Martinez. And because deep down, I think you know that something about Mrs. Clara's death never added up. You've been searching for answers just as long as I have. Maybe it's time we stopped searching alone. A heavy silence fell over the room as Eduardo weighed his options. The rational, business-minded part of him screamed that this was madness, that he should call security and have Sofia removed immediately. But another part, the part that had never stopped loving Clara, that had always sensed there was more to her story, urged him to take a leap of faith. Finally, he spoke, his decision made. Very well, Sofia. You have one chance to convince me. Tell me everything you know, everything you've discovered. Leave nothing out. And then we'll decide where to go from there. Sofia nodded, relief washing over her features. She moved to the plush leather sofa in the corner of the study, carefully placing the diary on the coffee table before her. As Eduardo took a seat across from her, she began to speak, her words painting a picture of love, betrayal, and secrets that would shake the very foundations of the Martinez legacy. Outside, the sun began to set over Mexico City, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Martinez estate. As night fell, the mansion that had once seemed like a monument to wealth and power now felt more like a mausoleum, housing ghosts of the past and secrets yet to be unveiled. Inside the study, two unlikely allies, the millionaire and the maid, embarked on a journey that would test the limits of truth, loyalty, and love. The diary lay between them, a Pandora's box of revelations waiting to be fully opened, promising to change their lives forever. As Sofia delved deeper into her tale, Eduardo found himself hanging on her every word, his world tilting on its axis. Whatever the outcome, he knew that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. The stage was set for a drama of epic proportions, a tale of love, loss, and redemption that would rival the most sensational of telenovelas. And as the first chapter of this real-life saga unfolded, neither Sofia nor Eduardo could have predicted the shocking twists and turns that lay ahead, or the earth-shattering truths that would be revealed before their story reached its conclusion. The grandfather clock in the corner of Eduardo's study chimed midnight, its sonorous tones echoing through the cavernous room. Sofia's voice had grown hoarse from hours of talking, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and barely contained emotion. Eduardo sat across from her, his posture rigid, hands clasped tightly in his lap as he struggled to process the avalanche of information she had shared. "So," he began, his voice rough with fatigue and disbelief, "you're telling me that Clara, my Clara, had a whole other life before she met me? A life that included..." He paused, the words still foreign on his tongue, "a child?" Sofia nodded solemnly. "Yes, Mr. Martinez. I know it's hard to believe, but it's all here in the diary." She gently patted the worn leather cover. "Mrs. Clara, my mother, she came from a small village in Oaxaca. She fell in love with a young revolutionary when she was just 17. But their love was forbidden. His family was wealthy, politically connected. They would never have accepted a poor girl from the countryside." Eduardo's mind reeled as he tried to reconcile this new information with the woman he thought he knew so well. "But why didn't she ever tell me? We shared everything, or so I thought." A sad smile played on Sofia's lips. "She wanted to, many times. There are entries here where she agonizes over keeping this secret from you. But she was afraid of losing you, afraid of the scandal it might cause. And..." Sofia hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor. "And what?" Eduardo pressed, leaning forward. "And she was afraid for my safety," Sofia whispered. "The last few entries, they're terrifying, Mr. Martinez. She writes about being watched, about strange phone calls and unexplained accidents. She believed that someone had discovered her past and was trying to silence her." Eduardo shot to his feet, pacing the room like a caged lion. "This is insanity. If Clara was in danger, why didn't she come to me? I could have protected her, hired security, done something." Sofia's voice was gentle, but firm. "Because she thought you might be involved." The words hit Eduardo like a physical blow. He staggered, gripping the edge of his desk for support. "What? How could she? How could you think that? I loved Clara more than life itself." "I know," Sofia said, rising to her feet. "And deep down, I think she knew that too. But the threats, they seemed to be coming from someone with immense power and resources. Someone who knew things about her past that she'd never shared with anyone. In her final entry, she writes that she couldn't be sure who to trust anymore." Eduardo's mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories from those last weeks of Clara's life. Her distraction, the way she'd jump at sudden noises, the long hours she spent locked away in her private study. At the time, he'd attributed it to stress, to the charity project she'd been working on. Now, a more sinister picture was emerging. "The accident," he murmured, almost to himself. "The car crash that killed her. You're saying it wasn't an accident at all?" Sofia nodded grimly. "The diary suggests as much. And there's more, Mr. Martinez. The day before she died, Mrs. Clara made a secret trip. She doesn't say where in the diary, but she mentions hiding something important, something that could bring down empires if it ever came to light." Eduardo's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and determination. "We need to find whatever it was she hid. It might be the key to understanding everything, why she was killed, who was behind it." For the first time since she'd arrived, a spark of hope lit Sofia's eyes. "You believe me then? You'll help me uncover the truth?" Eduardo was quiet for a long moment, studying Sofia's face. He could see Clara in her features now, the same determined set of her jaw, the same fire in her eyes. Whatever doubts he might still harbor about her story, he couldn't deny the overwhelming desire to uncover the truth about his wife's death. I believe that Clara kept secrets from me, he said slowly. And I believe that her death was no accident. Whether or not you are who you claim to be. He trailed off, shaking his head. That remains to be seen. But for now, yes, I'll help you. For Clara's sake. Sofia's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I know this isn't easy for you. But I promise, together we'll find out what really happened to her. As if on cue, a sharp knock at the study door made them both jump. Javier, Eduardo's butler, entered with an apologetic bow. Forgive the interruption, senor, but there's a call for you. They say it's urgent. Eduardo frowned. At this hour? Who is it? Javier's expression was grave. It's Chief Inspector Ramirez, sir. From the Federal Police. A chill ran down Eduardo's spine. He shot a warning glance at Sofia before moving to his desk and picking up the phone. Inspector Ramirez, what can I do for you at this ungodly hour? The voice on the other end was gruff and businesslike. Mr. Martinez, I apologize for the late call, but we've had a development in an ongoing investigation. Are you alone? Eduardo's eyes flicked to Sofia, who was watching him intently. Yes, Inspector. What's this about? We've received an anonymous tip, Ramirez continued. It concerns your late wife's charity organization. There are allegations of money laundering, Mr. Martinez. Serious allegations. We'll need to question you and review the foundation's financial records. Eduardo's mind raced. Clara's charity had been her pride and joy, her way of giving back to the community. The idea that it could have been used for illegal activities was preposterous. Unless... Of course, Inspector, he heard himself saying, his voice calm despite the turmoil in his mind. I'll have my lawyers prepare everything for you. When should we expect you? First thing tomorrow morning, Mr. Martinez. And please, don't leave town. This is a delicate matter, you understand. The line went dead, leaving Eduardo staring at the receiver in shock. Sofia approached cautiously, her face etched with concern. Mr. Martinez? What is it? What's wrong? Eduardo relayed the conversation, watching as Sofia's expression shifted from worry to grim understanding. It's starting, she whispered. Just like Mother feared. They're coming for you now, trying to discredit you before we can uncover the truth. But who? Eduardo demanded, slamming his fist on the desk. Who would go to such lengths? And why? What could possibly be so damning that they'd kill to keep it hidden? Sofia shook her head, her voice trembling. I don't know. But we need to act fast. Whatever Mrs. Clara hid, we need to find it before they do. Eduardo nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. We'll leave tonight, he decided. I have a private jet at the airport. We'll go to the village where Clara grew up, start our search there. But the police, Sofia protested. They'll be looking for you. A grim smile played on Eduardo's lips. Let them look. I've spent a lifetime building a fortune and an empire. I think I can manage to disappear for a while if I need to. As they hurried from the study, neither noticed the shadow that detached itself from behind a heavy curtain. Javier watched them go, his loyal butler's mask slipping to reveal a calculating gaze. As soon as the coast was clear, he pulled out a burner phone and dialed a number from memory. It's me, he said quietly when the call connected. They know. The girl found the diary and brought it to him. They're planning to leave tonight. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. Yes, I understand. I'll take care of it. Hanging up, Javier moved swiftly through the darkened halls of the mansion. In the garage, he deftly sabotaged Eduardo's personal car, ensuring it would break down shortly after leaving the estate. Then, with practiced ease, he slipped a small tracking device into Sofia's purse, where it lay forgotten in the foyer. Back in his quarters, Javier allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. For years, he had played the part of the loyal servant, watching and waiting. Now, finally, the endgame was approaching. Soon, the truth would come to light, but perhaps not the truth that Eduardo and Sofia were so desperately seeking. As the first rays of dawn began to streak the sky, a sleek black car pulled out of the Martinez estate. Eduardo gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set with determination. Beside him, Sofia clutched Clara's diary to her chest, her eyes scanning the road behind them for any sign of pursuit. Neither of them noticed the small blinking light emanating from Sofia's purse, silently broadcasting their every move to unseen watchers. As Mexico City faded in the rearview mirror, they were unaware that their quest for answers was about to lead them into a web of deceit, danger, and long-buried secrets that would shake the very foundations of their world. Miles away, in a nondescript office building, a figure shrouded in shadow watched a blinking dot move across a digital map. "So it begins," the figure murmured, a hint of anticipation coloring their voice. "Let the game commence." The sun climbed higher in the sky as Eduardo's car sped towards an uncertain future. In the passenger seat, Sofia finally succumbed to exhaustion, her head lolling against the window. Eduardo glanced at her, a mix of emotion swirling in his chest. Was she really Clara's daughter? Could he trust her? Or was he driving straight into an elaborate trap? As the questions tumbled through his mind, Eduardo failed to notice the black SUV that had pulled onto the highway behind them, matching their speed with predatory precision. The hunt was on, and the hunters were closing in. Suddenly, the car jerked violently, startling Sofia awake. "What's happening?" she cried, gripping the dashboard. Eduardo fought with the steering wheel as the car began to lose power. "Something's wrong with the engine," he growled, guiding the failing vehicle to the side of the road. As they coasted to a stop, the black SUV zoomed past them, disappearing around a bend in the road. "Damn it!" Eduardo slammed his hand against the steering wheel. "We don't have time for this." Sofia's eyes darted nervously between Eduardo and the empty road behind them. "Do you think it was sabotage?" she whispered. Eduardo's grim expression was all the answer she needed. "We need to get off the main road," he said, already reaching for his phone. "I'll call for a helicopter. We can't risk being followed." As Eduardo made the call, Sofia stepped out of the car, stretching her legs and taking in their surroundings. They had stopped near a small grove of trees, the countryside stretching out around them in a patchwork of greens and browns. It was a far cry from the opulent world she had known at the Martinez mansion. A glint of metal caught her eye, and Sofia bent to examine something half buried in the dusty soil near the car's front tire. Her blood ran cold as she realized what it was, a small, cylindrical object with wires protruding from one end. "Mr. Martinez," she called, her voice shaking. "I think you need to see this." Eduardo joined her, his face paling as he recognized the device. "It's a remote-controlled kill switch," he said grimly. "Someone really doesn't want us to reach our destination." Sofia's hand flew to her mouth. "Who could have done this? Who has access to your car?" Eduardo's eyes narrowed as the pieces began to fall into place. "Someone I trusted," he said, his voice hard with anger and betrayal. "Someone who's been right under my nose all along." Before Sofia could respond, the sound of an approaching helicopter filled the air. They looked up to see a sleek black chopper descending towards them, kicking up dust and debris. "Our ride's here," Eduardo shouted over the noise of the rotors. "Let's go. We can figure out who's behind this once we're safely away." As they climbed aboard the helicopter, neither Eduardo nor Sofia noticed the small blinking device that had fallen from Sofia's purse onto the car seat. Back at the Martinez mansion, Javier watched the tracking signal go dark with a mixture of frustration and grudging admiration. They were cleverer than he had given them credit for. Picking up his phone, he dialed a familiar number. "They've gone off-grid," he reported. "The car tracker is no longer transmitting." The voice on the other end was cool, collected. "No matter. We know their destination. Alert our contacts in Oaxaca. I want eyes on every road, every airport. They won't escape us for long." As Javier hung up, he allowed himself a small smile. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to get interesting. High above the Mexican countryside, Eduardo and Sofia sat in tense silence as the helicopter carried them towards Oaxaca and the secrets of Clara's past. Both were lost in their own thoughts, unaware that their every move was being anticipated by unseen forces. In a small village nestled in the mountains of Oaxaca, an old woman lit a candle before a faded photograph of a young Clara. "They're coming, mija," she whispered to the image of her long-lost daughter. "May God protect them and guide them to the truth." As the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows across the land, the stage was set for a confrontation that would unearth long-buried secrets and change the course of many lives. The truth about Clara's past, her tragic death, and the powerful forces that sought to keep it all hidden was waiting to be discovered. But as Eduardo and Sofia would soon learn, some truths come at a terrible price. And in the shadowy world they were about to enter, trust was a luxury they could ill afford. The helicopter banked sharply, beginning its descent towards a small, private airstrip on the outskirts of Oaxaca City. As the ground rushed up to meet them, Eduardo found himself studying Sofia's profile. In the harsh light of day, the resemblance to Clara was even more striking. But was it enough to stake his life on? "When we land," he said, raising his voice over the whir of the rotors, "we'll need to move fast. I have a safe house in the city where we can regroup and plan our next move." Sofia nodded, her eyes never leaving the rapidly approaching landscape. "And then?" she asked. Eduardo's expression hardened. "And then we find out who's trying to stop us, and why. It's time to uncover the truth about what really happened to Clara, no matter the cost." As the helicopter touched down, kicking up a cloud of dust, neither of them could have imagined the shocking revelations and heart-stopping dangers that lay ahead. The next chapter of their journey was about to begin, and with it, a cascade of events that would test their resolve, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately, change their lives forever. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered. But as Eduardo and Sofia were about to learn, sometimes the truth is far more terrifying than any lie. The safe house turned out to be a modest apartment in a nondescript building on the outskirts of Oaxaca City. As Eduardo ushered Sofia inside, his eyes scanned the street for any sign of pursuit. Satisfied they hadn't been followed, he closed the door and engaged multiple locks. "We should be safe here for now," he said, his voice tight with tension. "I've owned this place through a series of shell companies for years. No one knows about it except my most trusted advisors." Sofia raised an eyebrow. "And can those advisors still be trusted?" Eduardo's jaw clenched. "That remains to be seen. After what happened with the car, I'm not sure who we can rely on anymore." As Sofia explored the sparse living room, Eduardo retreated to a small study off the main area. He returned moments later with a laptop and a stack of files. "These are copies of all the documents related to Clara's charity," he explained, setting them on the coffee table. "If there's any evidence of wrongdoing, it should be in here." For the next few hours, they pored over financial statements, donation records, and project reports. The more they read, the more confused Eduardo became. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Everything looks completely legitimate. Where is this alleged money laundering?" Sofia, who had been quietly examining Clara's diary, looked up sharply. "Maybe that's the point," she said. "What if the allegations are just a smokescreen? A way to discredit you and keep us distracted?" Eduardo's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "Of course," he breathed. "They're trying to keep us from discovering whatever it was that Clara hid. But what could be so important that they'd go to these lengths?" Before Sofia could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Eduardo motioned for Sofia to be quiet as he crept towards the entrance, his hand reaching for the gun he kept hidden in a nearby drawer. "Who is it?" he called out, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "Eduardo? Eduardo Martinez?" The voice was female, elderly, with a hint of a local accent. "I know you're in there. I've come about Clara." Eduardo and Sofia exchanged startled glances. Cautiously, Eduardo opened the door a crack, revealing a small, wizened woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Who are you?" Eduardo demanded. "How did you find us?" The old woman's eyes twinkled with a mixture of amusement and sadness. "My name is Magdalena Ortiz. I was Clara's nanny when she was a child. And as for how I found you..." She smiled enigmatically. "Let's just say that some secrets are impossible to keep in a small village." Despite his reservations, Eduardo found himself opening the door wider, allowing Magdalena to enter. As she stepped into the apartment, her gaze fell on Sofia, and she gasped, her hand flying to her heart. "Dios mío," she whispered. "It's true then. You've come home at last, Nina." Sofia's eyes filled with tears as she rushed forward, embracing the old woman. "You knew," she choked out. "You knew about me?" Magdalena stroked Sofia's hair, gently. "Of course, my dear. I was there the day you were born. I helped your mother keep you safe all those years ago." Eduardo watched the scene unfold with a mixture of emotion. Part of him wanted to believe in this touching reunion, but the events of the past day had left him wary. "I hate to interrupt," he said, his voice tight, "but we need answers. What do you know about Clara's death? And why is someone trying to stop us from uncovering the truth?" Magdalena's expression grew grave as she settled onto the worn sofa. "It's a long and complicated story, Mr. Martinez. One that begins long before Clara met you, in a time of great turmoil and danger." As Magdalena began to speak, weaving a tale of love, betrayal, and dark secrets, Eduardo and Sofia listened with rapt attention. The story that unfolded was almost too fantastic to believe, a tale of Clara's youthful romance with a charismatic revolutionary, of powerful families determined to keep them apart, and of a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of Mexican society. Clara's lover, Sofia's father, was part of a group working to expose corruption in the government, Magdalena explained, her voice dropping to a near whisper. They uncovered evidence of massive fraud, money laundering, and worse. But before they could go public with their findings, tragedy struck. Sofia leaned forward, her eyes wide. "What happened?" Magdalena's gaze turned distant, as if looking into the past. "There was an attack. Many of the group were killed. Clara's lover was among the missing, presumed dead. Clara, pregnant with you, Sofia, went into hiding. She was terrified they would come for her and her unborn child next." Eduardo's mind raced as he tried to process this information. But what does this have to do with Clara's death all these years later? And why target her charity? Magdalena fixed Eduardo with a penetrating stare. "Because, Mr. Martinez, the people behind that attack all those years ago are still in power today. And Clara, bless her soul, never stopped trying to uncover the truth. She used her position, her charity work, to continue the investigation in secret." A chill ran down Eduardo's spine as the pieces began to fall into place. "Are you saying that Clara was murdered because she discovered something? Something connected to this old conspiracy?" Magdalena nodded solemnly. "In the weeks before her death, Clara came to see me. She was frightened, said she had finally found the evidence she had been searching for all these years. Evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful people in Mexico." Sofia clutched Clara's diary to her chest, her knuckles white. "The diary mentions hiding something important. Is that what she was talking about?" "I believe so," Magdalena confirmed. "Clara said she had hidden the evidence somewhere safe, somewhere only someone who truly knew her would think to look." The old woman's eyes twinkled as she looked at Sofia. "I believe she meant for you to find it, Nina. You, her daughter, the living link to her past." Eduardo paced the room, his mind whirling with implications. "But if what you're saying is true, we're up against some of the most powerful and dangerous people in the country. How can we possibly hope to uncover the truth and survive?" Magdalena's expression was grave. "It won't be easy, and it certainly won't be safe. But Clara believed that the truth was worth any risk. The question is, do you?" Before either Eduardo or Sofia could respond, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Eduardo rushed to the window, his heart sinking as he saw 3 black SUVs pull up outside the building. "We've been found," he said grimly, reaching for his gun. "We need to leave, now." Magdalena stood, her frail frame suddenly radiating strength and determination. "There's a secret passage in the basement, a relic from the revolution. It leads to a series of tunnels beneath the city. I can show you the way." As they hurried to gather what they could, the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs echoed through the building. Time was running out. Eduardo turned to Sofia, his expression conflicted. "Are you sure you want to do this? There's still time for you to walk away, to forget all of this." Sofia's eyes blazed with a mixture of fear and determination. "Clara was my mother," she said firmly. "I need to know the truth, no matter the cost." With a nod of understanding, Eduardo led the way out of the apartment and towards an uncertain future. As they descended into the dark, musty tunnels beneath Oaxaca City, none of them could have imagined the shocking revelations and heart-stopping dangers that lay ahead. Miles away, in a luxurious office in Mexico City, a phone rang. A hand with manicured nails picked it up, listening intently to the voice on the other end. "They've escaped into the tunnels," the voice reported. "Should we pursue?" The woman behind the desk smiled coldly, her eyes falling on a framed photograph of a much younger Clara. "No," she said smoothly. "Let them run. They're only leading us to exactly what we've been searching for all these years." As she hung up the phone, Isabella Vega, one of Mexico's most powerful and feared businesswomen, allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Soon, very soon, all of Clara's secrets would be hers. And then, nothing would stand in her way. Deep beneath the streets of Oaxaca, Eduardo, Sofia, and Magdalena made their way through a labyrinth of tunnels, each step taking them further into danger, and closer to the truth. The air was thick with dust and the weight of history, the walls around them holding centuries of secrets. "These tunnels were used by revolutionaries during the war," Magdalena explained in a hushed voice, her wrinkled hand trailing along the rough stone walls. "They connect to a network that spans the entire city. If we're careful, we can use them to move undetected." Eduardo, bringing up the rear with his gun at the ready, couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. "And where exactly are we going?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow passage. Magdalena paused, turning to face them with a mysterious smile. "To the place where it all began. The old hacienda where Clara grew up. If she hid something, that's where we'll find it." As they continued their journey through the darkness, Sofia's mind raced with questions. She had spent her entire life wondering about her origins, and now, in the span of a few days, her world had been turned upside down. She was the daughter of a revolutionary and a woman she had known only as her employer. She was heir to a legacy of secrets and dangers she never could have imagined. "Tell me about my father," she said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "What was he like?" Magdalena's eyes softened with memory. Alejandro was a passionate man, full of fire and dreams of a better world. He and Clara were so in love, it was beautiful to see. But their families, they came from different worlds. It was doomed from the start. Eduardo listened intently, feeling a pang of jealousy he knew was irrational. He had always believed that his love with Clara was perfect, untouchable. Now he was discovering entire chapters of her life he had known nothing about. As they emerged from a particularly narrow section of the tunnel, the group found themselves in a large, cavernous space. Ancient Aztec carvings adorned the walls, barely visible in the dim light of their flashlights. "We'll rest here for a moment," Magdalena declared, lowering herself onto a fallen column with a soft groan. While Sofia tended to the older woman, Eduardo took the opportunity to explore the chamber. His flashlight beam caught something glinting in a far corner, and he moved closer to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. "Sofia," he called out, his voice tight with tension. "Come look at this." As Sofia joined him, Eduardo's flashlight illuminated a modern laptop computer, its screen cracked, but still faintly glowing. Beside it lay a body, long dead, its desiccated features frozen in a rictus of terror. Oh my God, Sofia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Eduardo knelt beside the grim tableau, his trained eye taking in details. This man hasn't been dead for long, he muttered. Maybe a few weeks. And look at his clothes, expensive suit, designer watch. This is no vagrant who wandered down here and got lost. Sofia's eyes widened as she spotted something clutched in the dead man's hand. Eduardo, look. It's a photograph. Gently, Eduardo pried the picture from the corpse's stiff fingers. As he held it up to the light, both he and Sofia inhaled sharply. The photo showed a much younger Clara, her arms around a handsome man with Sofia's eyes. And there, standing behind them with a cold smile, was a face they both recognized instantly. Isabella Vega, Eduardo breathed, his mind reeling. But that's impossible. Clara always said they'd never met before I introduced them at a charity gala 5 years ago. Sofia shook her head, her voice trembling. She lied. My mother lied about knowing one of the most powerful women in Mexico. But why? Before Eduardo could respond, the sound of distant voices echoed through the tunnels. Magdalena was on her feet in an instant, her earlier frailty forgotten. We've lingered too long, she hissed. They're coming. We must go, now. As they hurried deeper into the maze of tunnels, Eduardo couldn't shake the feeling that they were running headlong into something far bigger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Clara's secrets, it seemed, went deeper than any of them had realized. And somewhere above them, in the sunlit world they had left behind, Isabella Vega was closing in, her elegant fingers tightening around the threads of a conspiracy decades in the making. The race to uncover the truth about Clara's past, and the forces that had led to her death, was entering its most perilous phase. And as Eduardo and Sofia were about to discover, some secrets are worth killing for. The tunnels seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning beneath the ancient city. Eduardo had long since lost all sense of direction, relying entirely on Magdalena's seemingly unerring instinct for navigation. Sofia stumbled along beside him, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. We're nearly there, Magdalena assured them, her voice barely above a whisper. Just a little further. As they rounded another bend, a faint glimmer of natural light appeared ahead. Magdalena led them towards it, emerging into a small, circular chamber with a shaft of sunlight streaming down from a grate high above. The old well, Magdalena explained, a hint of triumph in her voice. It leads directly into the cellars of the hacienda. We've made it. But as they moved towards the ancient stone stairs leading upwards, a voice rang out from the shadows, freezing them in their tracks. I'm afraid your journey ends here. Eduardo whirled, gun raised, as a figure stepped into the light. His jaw dropped in disbelief. Javier, he gasped, recognizing his trusted butler. What the hell are you doing here? Javier's usually impassive face was twisted into a sneer, his own weapon trained steadily on the group. Fulfilling a promise I made long ago, Mr. Martinez. A promise to see justice done, no matter the cost. Sofia's eyes darted between Eduardo and Javier, confusion evident on her face. You know him? Eduardo nodded grimly, never taking his eyes off his former employee. He's been my butler for over a decade. I trusted him with everything. His voice hardened. Clearly, that was a mistake. Javier's laugh was cold and humorless. Oh, Eduardo. You have no idea how many mistakes you've made. How many lies you've been living with all these years. What are you talking about? Eduardo demanded, his finger tightening on the trigger. I'm talking about Clara, Javier spat, his calm facade cracking to reveal a deep, seething anger. I'm talking about the woman you claim to have loved, the woman whose murder you helped cover up. The accusation hung in the air like a physical thing, shocking everyone into silence. It was Sofia who finally found her voice, stepping forward, despite Eduardo's attempt to hold her back. That's a lie, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Eduardo loved my mother. He would never harm her. Javier's eyes softened slightly as they fell on Sofia. Oh, my dear. You've been lied to your entire life. It's time you learned the truth about your so-called father. He's not my father, Sofia protested weakly, but doubt had begun to creep into her voice. No, Javier agreed, he's not. But he is the man who orchestrated your mother's death, to keep her from exposing his crimes. Eduardo's mind reeled, unable to process the accusations being hurled at him. This is insane, he growled. I loved Clara more than anything in this world. I would never dash. Enough. Magdalena's voice cracked like a whip, silencing them all. The old woman stepped forward, her eyes blazing with an inner fire that belied her frail appearance. Enough lies. Enough half-truths. It's time the whole story was told. All eyes turned to Magdalena as she drew herself up, suddenly seeming to fill the chamber with her presence. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of decades of secrets. Clara was not the saint you all believe her to be, Magdalena began, her eyes moving between Eduardo, Sofia, and Javier. Nor was she the villain some would paint her as. She was a woman caught between two worlds, trying to do what she thought was right. Sofia stepped closer to the old woman, her voice trembling. What do you mean? Please, I need to know the truth about my mother. Magdalena sighed heavily. Clara was indeed in love with Alejandro, Sofia's father. But their romance was not just star-crossed, it was dangerous. Alejandro was not just a revolutionary, he was deep undercover, infiltrating the very corruption he sought to expose. Eduardo's brow furrowed. But what does this have to do with me? With Clara's death? Everything, Magdalena replied. Because Clara was not just Alejandro's lover. She was his partner in the investigation. The revelation hit them all like a physical blow. Javier's gun wavered slightly, his eyes wide with surprise. Magdalena continued, her voice growing stronger. When Alejandro disappeared, presumed dead, Clara didn't just go into hiding. She went deeper undercover. She reinvented herself, climbing the social ladder, getting close to the very people she and Alejandro had been investigating. Understanding dawned in Eduardo's eyes. Including me, he whispered. Magdalena nodded solemnly. You were never the target, Eduardo. But your connections, your wealth, they gave Clara access she needed. She cared for you, in her way, but her mission came first, Eduardo finished, his voice hollow. Sofia shook her head in disbelief. No, this can't be true. My mother wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Javier cut in, his voice bitter. Wouldn't lie? Wouldn't use people? Wake up, girl. Your mother was a spy, willing to do whatever it took to complete her mission. That's not fair, Magdalena protested. Clara was trying to expose a conspiracy that went to the highest levels of government and business. She believed she was fighting for a greater good. Eduardo's mind was reeling. But her death, if I didn't, then who? Magdalena's eyes filled with tears. Clara got too close. She found the evidence she needed, evidence that would have brought down an empire of corruption. But someone found out. Someone she trusted. All eyes turned to Javier, whose face had gone pale. No, he whispered. No, it wasn't me. I loved her. I was trying to protect her. By following us? Eduardo demanded. By sabotaging my car? Javier's composure cracked entirely. I was trying to keep you from the truth. To protect Clara's legacy. Enough. Sofia's voice rang out, silencing them all. She turned to Magdalena, her eyes pleading. Please. Just tell us what really happened to my mother. Magdalena took a deep breath. The night Clara died, she called me. She said she had found something big. She was on her way to meet someone she said could be trusted, someone who could help her bring the evidence to light. Who? Eduardo and Javier asked simultaneously. Magdalena's next words fell like a bombshell. Isabella Vega. The name hung in the air, heavy with implication. Eduardo's mind flashed to the photograph they had found, the one showing Clara and Isabella together years ago. But Isabella, Eduardo began, is at the center of everything, Magdalena finished. The charity, the corruption, Clara's death, it all leads back to her. Before anyone could react to this revelation, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Multiple footsteps, growing closer by the second. They found us, Javier hissed, his earlier antagonism forgotten in the face of a common enemy. Eduardo made a split-second decision. Up the well, he commanded. Now. All of us. As they scrambled up the ancient stairs, Sofia clutching Clara's diary to her chest, Eduardo's mind raced. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about Clara, had been a lie. But one thing was certain, the truth lay ahead, in the hacienda above. And Isabella Vega, the woman he had considered a friend, held the key to it all. As they emerged into the dusty cellars of the old hacienda, the sounds of pursuit growing ever closer, Eduardo knew that the final confrontation was at hand. Whatever secrets lay hidden in these walls, whatever truth Clara had died to protect, it was time for it all to come to light. The stage was set for a showdown that would shake the foundations of power in Mexico and force every one of them to confront the lies they had lived with for so long. As Sofia pushed open the cellar door, sunlight streaming in, she steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. Her mother's final secret was within reach, and nothing would stop her from uncovering it, not Isabella Vega, not the forces of corruption, not even the shocking truths about her own origins. The time for secrets was over. The time for truth had come. The old hacienda loomed before them, a crumbling monument to faded glory. As Eduardo, Sofia, Magdalena, and Javier emerged from the cellar, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. They had mere minutes before their pursuers would be upon them. Quickly, Magdalena urged, her eyes scanning the overgrown courtyard. Clara's old room. If she hid anything, it would be there. They raced across the weed-choked stones, past dry fountains and withered gardens. Sofia's heart pounded in her chest, Clara's diary clutched tightly in her hands. So close to answers, yet still so far. The interior of the hacienda was a maze of dusty corridors and faded grandeur. Magdalena led them unerringly through the labyrinth, up a creaking staircase, and down a long hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Here, she said at last, stopping before a nondescript door. This was Clara's room. As Eduardo reached for the handle, a voice rang out behind them, freezing them in their tracks. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Eduardo. They turned as one to see Isabella Vega standing at the end of the hallway, flanked by armed men. Her tailored suit was immaculate, her smile cold and triumphant. Isabella, Eduardo growled, his hand instinctively moving towards his gun. I should have known you'd be behind this. Isabella's laugh was like cut glass. Oh, Eduardo. Always so quick to judge, so slow to understand. But then, that's why Clara chose you, isn't it? The perfect, clueless husband. Sofia stepped forward, her eyes blazing. You knew my mother? All this time, you knew who I was? Isabella's gaze softened fractionally as it fell on Sofia. My dear, I've known you since the day you were born. Clara was very important to me. Important enough to kill? Javier spat, his earlier composure completely shattered. Isabella's eyes hardened. You have no idea what you're talking about, old man. None of you do. You think you're so close to the truth, but you don't even know what questions to ask. Then enlighten us, Eduardo challenged, subtly positioning himself between Isabella and Sofia. What is the truth, Isabella? What was so important that Clara had to die for it? For a moment, something like pain flashed across Isabella's face. Then her mask of cool control slipped back into place. The truth, Eduardo, is that nothing is as simple as you'd like to believe. Not politics, not business, and certainly not love. She gestured to her men, who began to advance down the hallway. Now, why don't we continue this discussion somewhere more comfortable? I believe Clara's old study would be appropriate. As they were herded at gunpoint through the hacienda, Sofia's mind raced. There had to be a way out, some clue they were missing. Almost unconsciously, her fingers traced the worn leather of her mother's diary. The study was a large, airy room, dominated by a massive oak desk. Dust covers were draped over most of the furniture, but one wall was lined with bookshelves that looked recently disturbed. Isabella moved behind the desk, a place of power, while her men positioned themselves at the doors and windows. "Now then," she said, her voice deceptively pleasant, "let's talk about Clara, shall we? About the work she was doing, the secrets she uncovered." Eduardo's eyes narrowed. "You mean the corruption she was investigating? The conspiracy that goes all the way to the top?" Isabella's laugh was genuinely amused this time. "Oh, Eduardo. You really have no idea, do you? Clara wasn't investigating corruption. She was protecting it." The statement hung in the air, shocking everyone into silence. It was Magdalena who finally found her voice. "That's a lie," she said, but her tone lacked conviction. "Is it?" Isabella challenged. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a file, tossing it onto the desk. "See for yourself. Bank records, shell companies, money trails, all leading back to Clara's charities. She wasn't exposing a conspiracy, she was running one." Sofia shook her head vehemently. "No, I don't believe you. My mother was a good person. She fought for justice." "Your mother," Isabella said softly, "was the most brilliant operative I've ever known. She could make anyone believe anything she wanted. Even her own daughter." Eduardo's mind was reeling. "But, the diary. The evidence she said she found." Isabella's smile was almost pitying. "Oh, there was evidence all right. Evidence that would have brought down governments, destroyed lives. But not in the way you think." She turned to Sofia, her expression softening. "Your mother wasn't just fighting corruption, my dear. She was fighting a war. A shadow war that's been raging for decades, with Mexico's very soul at stake." Sofia clutched the diary tighter. "What are you talking about? What war?" Isabella sighed, suddenly looking very tired. "The war between those who would sell this country to the highest bidder, and those of us trying to hold it together. Your father, Alejandro, he thought the answer was revolution. Clara, she saw a different path." Understanding began to dawn in Eduardo's eyes. The charities. The corruption. It was all a front, wasn't it? A way to control the flow of money, to keep things stable. Isabella nodded approvingly. "Very good, Eduardo. Perhaps you're not as clueless as I thought. Yes, Clara used her position, her charities, to maintain a delicate balance. To keep the wolves at bay while we worked towards real, lasting change." "But then why kill her?" Javier demanded. "If she was on your side, why murder her?" Pain flashed across Isabella's face, real and raw. "I didn't," she whispered. "God help me, I tried to save her. But Clara, she got in too deep. She uncovered something so dangerous that even I couldn't protect her." Sofia's voice was barely audible. "What? What did she find?" Isabella's eyes locked onto the diary in Sofia's hands. The final piece of the puzzle. The name of the one person who could bring it all crashing down. The true power behind the throne. As if on cue, the sound of a helicopter approaching filled the air. Isabella's men tensed, hands moving to their weapons. "He's here," Isabella breathed, a mixture of fear and anticipation in her voice. "Who?" Eduardo demanded. "Who's behind all this?" Before Isabella could answer, the door burst open. A figure strode in, radiating authority and menace. As he stepped into the light, multiple gasps of recognition filled the room. "No," Sofia whispered, her face pale with shock. "It can't be." The newcomer's eyes swept the room, lingering on Sofia with an unreadable expression. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, cultured, and chillingly familiar. "Hello, my dear," said Alejandro Vargas, Sofia's long-lost father. It's been far too long. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap, shocking everyone into silence. Sofia staggered back, her legs weak, as she stared at the man she had believed dead for so many years. "Father," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and long-buried hope. Alejandro's smile was warm, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. "My beautiful Sofia. How you've grown. The spitting image of your mother." Eduardo's mind raced, trying to process this new development. "But, you were supposed to be dead. Clara thought you were killed in the revolution." Alejandro's laugh was without humor. "Clara believed what I needed her to believe. Just as you all have. It's remarkable how easy it is to manipulate people when you control the narrative." Isabella stepped forward, her earlier confidence replaced by wary respect. "Alejandro. I didn't expect you to come yourself. How could I stay away?" Alejandro replied smoothly. "When the final act of our little drama is about to unfold. When my daughter has finally come home." Sofia shook her head, backing away. No. No, this isn't right. My father was a hero. A revolutionary fighting for justice. You can't be. Can't be what? Alejandro challenged. The man who's been pulling the strings all along? The architect of the very corruption your mother thought she was fighting? His smile was cold. "Oh, my dear. You have so much to learn about how the world really works." As the truth of the situation began to sink in, the room erupted into chaos. Javier lunged for Alejandro, only to be restrained by armed guards. Eduardo moved to protect Sofia, his gun drawn but useless against the superior numbers. Amidst the confusion, Magdalena's voice cut through the noise. "The diary," she cried. "Sofia, the diary. Your mother's final message." Sofia's eyes widened as she remembered the book clutched in her hands. With trembling fingers, she opened it to the last entry, reading aloud the words that Clara had written in her final hours. "To my dearest Sofia, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened. Trust no one, not even those closest to you. The truth lies where it all began, in the heart of the hacienda. Find the rose, unlock its secret, and finish what I started. Remember, my love. In this world of shadows, the greatest deception is believing you know the whole truth. Be brave, my daughter. The future of Mexico rests in your hands." As Sofia finished reading, a heavy silence fell over the room. Alejandro's face had gone pale, while Isabella looked stricken. "The rose," Eduardo murmured. "What does it mean?" Magdalena's eyes lit up with understanding. "The mosaic. In the old chapel. Clara always said it held a secret." Before anyone could react, Sofia bolted from the room, Clara's diary clutched to her chest. Eduardo and Javier moved to follow, but Alejandro's voice stopped them cold. "Let her go," he commanded. "It's time for my daughter to learn the final truth. The truth that Clara died protecting." As Sofia raced through the hacienda, her heart pounding in her chest, she knew she was running towards more than just answers. She was running towards her destiny, towards the culmination of a story that had begun long before she was born. Behind her, the sound of pursuit grew louder. The final confrontation was at hand, and the fate of a nation hung in the balance. In the old chapel, beneath the faded mosaic of a blood-red rose, lay the key to unlocking decades of secrets and lies. As Sofia approached, her hand outstretched, she steeled herself for whatever revelation awaited. The truth, in all its terrible glory, was finally within reach. Sofia's footsteps echoed through the abandoned chapel as she approached the faded mosaic. The red rose, once vibrant, now dulled by years of neglect, seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Her mother's final words rang in her ears, "Find the rose, unlock its secret." With trembling hands, Sofia reached out to touch the cold, rough tiles. As her fingers traced the outline of a petal, she felt a subtle shift. A click, barely audible, resonated through the empty space. suddenly, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small, ornate box, its surface etched with intricate patterns. Sofia's heart raced as she retrieved it, the weight of history heavy in her hands. Just as she was about to open it, footsteps sounded behind her. She whirled to see Eduardo, Javier, and Magdalena rushing into the chapel, followed closely by Isabella and Alejandro. "Sofia," Eduardo called out, his voice tight with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, clutching the box to her chest. "I found it. Whatever secret my mother died protecting, it's in here." Alejandro stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the box. "My dear, perhaps it would be best if you handed that over to me. There are things at play here that you couldn't possibly understand." Sofia backed away, shaking her head. "No. Mother left this for me. She wanted me to finish what she started." "And what exactly did she start?" Isabella interjected, her usual composure cracking. "Clara was playing a dangerous game, Sofia. A game with rules you don't know." "Then explain them to me," Sofia demanded, her voice echoing off the chapel walls. "All of you, with your secrets and lies. I deserve to know the truth." A tense silence fell over the group. It was Magdalena who finally broke it, her aged voice carrying the weight of decades of secrets. "It began long ago," she said, her eyes distant with memory. "With 3 young idealists who dreamed of changing Mexico. Alejandro, the fiery revolutionary. Isabella, the brilliant strategist. And Clara, the heart that bound them together." Alejandro's face softened for a moment. "We were going to save the world," he murmured. "Root out corruption, bring true democracy to our people." But the deeper we dug, Isabella continued, the more we realized how entrenched the problems were. How the very systems we sought to change were keeping the country from falling into chaos. Eduardo's brow furrowed. "So you became the very thing you were fighting against?" Alejandro's laugh was bitter. "We became pragmatists, Eduardo. We realized that sometimes, to fight the darkness, you have to step into the shadows yourself." "The charities," Sofia breathed, understanding dawning. "The corruption, the money laundering. It was all part of your plan?" Isabella nodded. "A necessary evil. We used the system to control it, to guide Mexico towards a better future, even if the path wasn't always clean." "But Clara," Javier interjected, his voice pained. "If you were all working together, why did she have to die?" A heavy silence fell. Alejandro and Isabella exchanged a loaded glance. "Because she found out the truth," Alejandro said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "The real secret we've been keeping all these years." Sofia's grip tightened on the box. What truth? What could be worth killing for? Isabella stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Sofia, you have to understand. The stability of the entire country was at stake. We had to make impossible choices." "What choices?" Eduardo demanded. "What did you do?" Alejandro's voice was cold when he spoke. "We made a deal. With the very forces we had once sworn to destroy." The revelation hung in the air, shocking everyone into silence. It was Sofia who found her voice first. "What kind of deal?" "A bargain with the devil," Isabella said softly. "We agreed to maintain the illusion of democracy, to keep the people placated, while the real power remained in the hands of a select few. In exchange, we gained the ability to enact real, lasting change from within the system." Eduardo's face contorted with disgust. "You betrayed everything you claimed to stand for. You're no better than the corrupt officials you pretended to fight." "We did what was necessary," Alejandro roared, his composure finally cracking. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if we hadn't stepped in? The country would have torn itself apart." Sofia's mind raced, pieces falling into place. "And mother? She discovered this bargain?" Isabella nodded, tears in her eyes. "Clara, she never lost her idealism. When she found out the truth, she couldn't accept it. She threatened to expose everything. So you killed her, Javier spat, his hands clenching into fists. No. Alejandro and Isabella cried in unison. We tried to reason with her, Isabella continued, her voice breaking. To make her understand the necessity of what we'd done. But Clara, she was always the best of us. She couldn't live with the compromise. Understanding dawned in Sofia's eyes. She killed herself, she whispered. Didn't she? Rather than be part of your grand deception. The pain on Alejandro and Isabella's faces was answer enough. But not before ensuring the truth would come out, Magdalena added, a hint of pride in her voice. She left behind evidence, proof of the bargain and its consequences. Evidence that could bring down the entire system. All eyes turned to the box in Sofia's hands. That's what's in there, isn't it? Eduardo asked. The key to unraveling everything you built? Alejandro stepped forward, his hand outstretched. Sofia, my daughter. You have to understand. If that information gets out, it will destabilize the entire country. Thousands could die in the chaos that follows. Sofia looked from the box to her father, tears streaming down her face. And if I don't release it? If I destroy the evidence? What then? Then we continue as we have, Isabella said softly. Guiding the country from the shadows, working towards a better future, even if we have to get our hands dirty in the process. And nothing changes, Eduardo countered. The corruption continues, the people remain deceived. Sofia closed her eyes, the weight of the decision crushing down on her. In her hands, she held the power to expose a decades-long conspiracy, to bring down a system built on lies and backroom deals. But at what cost? As she stood there, torn between truth and pragmatism, between idealism and harsh reality, Sofia realized that this was the real legacy her mother had left her. Not just the evidence, but the burden of choice. The responsibility to decide the future of a nation. With shaking hands, she opened the box. Inside lay a single USB drive and a handwritten note in Clara's elegant script, to my darling Sofia. The truth is a double-edged sword. Use it wisely, with courage and compassion. The future is in your hands now. Make the choice I never could. With all my love, Mama. As Sofia read the note aloud, a heavy silence fell over the chapel. The fate of Mexico hung in the balance, resting on the shoulders of a young woman who had only days ago believed herself to be nothing more than a maid. Eduardo stepped forward, his voice gentle. Sofia, whatever you decide, I'm with you. We all are. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, Eduardo, loyal and steadfast, Javier, broken but seeking redemption, Magdalena, a link to her mother's past, Isabella and Alejandro, the architects of a flawed but functioning system. In that moment, Sofia understood the true weight of her mother's legacy. It wasn't about exposing corruption or toppling governments. It was about finding a path forward, a way to bridge the gap between idealism and reality. With a deep breath, she made her choice. We release the truth, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. But not all at once. Not in a way that will bring chaos and destruction. We use this information to force real change, to hold those in power accountable. We finish what my mother started, but we do it smart. We do it right. Alejandro's eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and pride. Isabella nodded slowly, a smile tugging at her lips. Just like your mother, she murmured. Always finding a third way. As the group began to discuss the logistics of Sofia's plan, a sense of hope filled the old chapel. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and hard choices. But for the first time in years, there was a chance for real change, for a future built on truth and justice rather than secrets and compromise. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains of Oaxaca, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. A new day was coming, bringing with it the promise of a better tomorrow. And at the center of it all stood Sofia, no longer just a maid, no longer just a daughter, but a woman ready to shape the destiny of a nation. Clara's diary, clutched in her hand, was no longer a symbol of shocking revelations, but a guidebook for the challenges that lay ahead. As the last light faded from the sky, Sofia knew that her journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Martinez mansion was alive with the buzz of conversation and the soft strains of a string quartet. Mexico's elite had gathered for what had become the most anticipated charity gala of the year. But this was no ordinary fundraiser. Sofia Martinez, resplendent in a deep blue gown that offset her mother's locket, stood at the podium, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the assembled crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. 1 year ago, we embarked on a journey together. A journey towards transparency, accountability, and true progress for our beloved Mexico. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on familiar faces. Eduardo, standing proudly at her side. Magdalena, beaming from her seat of honor. Javier, now head of security, vigilant as ever. And in the back, partially hidden in the shadows, Isabella and Alejandro, their presence a reminder of the complex web that had brought them all to this moment. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Clara Martinez Foundation for Truth and Reconciliation has exceeded all expectations. With your support, we've exposed corruption at the highest levels, instituted sweeping reforms, and begun the long process of healing the wounds that have divided our nation for too long. Applause rippled through the crowd. Sofia allowed herself a small smile, remembering the tumultuous months that had led to this moment. It hadn't been easy. The release of Clara's evidence, carefully managed and strategically timed, had sent shockwaves through Mexican society. There had been resignations, arrests, and more than a few tense standoffs. But slowly, surely, change had come. Eduardo stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Sofia's back. Their relationship had evolved over the past year, growing from uneasy allies to trusted partners. Though the shadow of Clara's deception still lingered, they had found in each other a shared commitment to seeing her final mission through. But our work is far from over, Sofia continued, her voice taking on a note of challenge. Tonight, we set our sights on an even more ambitious goal. With the support of key members of the business community, her eyes flicked meaningfully towards Isabella, we're launching a nationwide initiative to root out systemic corruption and create new opportunities for those who have been left behind. As Sofia outlined the details of the plan, she could feel the energy in the room shift. Hope, tinged with a healthy dose of skepticism, filled the air. This was the real test, not just exposing the sins of the past, but charting a course for a better future. Later, as the gala wound down, Sofia found herself on the mansion's terrace, taking a moment to breathe in the cool night air. So much had changed in a year. The maid who had once been invisible in these halls was now at the center of a movement that was reshaping the country. Quite a speech, a familiar voice said from behind her. Sofia turned to see Alejandro, her father, stepping out of the shadows. Their relationship remained complicated. The idealistic revolutionary she had imagined had turned out to be a pragmatic power broker, willing to make dark compromises for what he saw as the greater good. And yet, over the past year, she had begun to understand the weight of the choices he had faced. I had a good teacher, Sofia replied, thinking of Clara's diary and the wisdom it contained. Alejandro's smile was tinged with sadness. Your mother would be proud. You've managed to find a balance that eluded the rest of us. Sofia nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to touch Clara's locket. I'm trying to honor her memory. To finish what she started, but in a way that doesn't tear the country apart. It won't be easy, Alejandro warned. There are still powerful forces that prefer the old way of doing things. They won't go quietly. I know, Sofia said, her voice steely with determination. But I'm not alone. As if on cue, Eduardo appeared in the doorway. Sofia? The press is ready for the final statement. She nodded, smoothing her dress. Duty calls. As Sofia moved to rejoin the party, Alejandro caught her arm gently. Sofia, he said, his voice low. There's something you should know. Something about your mother's past, about the real reason behind her actions. Sofia felt her heart skip a beat. After a year of revelations, she had thought there were no more secrets left to uncover. What is it? Alejandro glanced at Eduardo, then back at his daughter. Not now. But soon. There are things you need to understand about the choices she made, and the sacrifices that still lie ahead. Before Sofia could press him further, Isabella appeared, her expression urgent. We have a situation, she said quietly. The file we discussed, it's been compromised. The weight of unfinished business settled over the terrace. Sofia looked from Alejandro to Isabella, then back to Eduardo, who stood waiting patiently by the door. In that moment, she realized that the story was far from over. The diary that had started it all was just the first chapter in a saga that would continue to unfold. With a deep breath, Sofia straightened her shoulders and stepped back into the light of the ballroom. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets still lurked in the shadows, she was ready to face them. For herself, for her mother's memory, and for the future of Mexico. As she took her place at the podium once more, cameras flashing and reporters leaning in eagerly, Sofia felt a sense of purpose wash over her. The shock of discovering her true identity, of unraveling the web of lies and corruption, had transformed into a steely resolve. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice ringing out clear and strong. We stand at a crossroads in our nation's history. The path forward will not be easy, but together, we can build the Mexico we've always dreamed of. A Mexico of truth, justice, and opportunity for all. The room erupted in applause, but Sofia's mind was already racing ahead. To the challenges that awaited, to the truths yet to be uncovered, to the next chapter in a story that had begun with a shocking discovery and a mother's long-hidden diary. As the cameras flashed and the crowd cheered, Sofia allowed herself a small, secret smile. Whatever came next, she was ready. The maid who had become a millionaire's daughter, the daughter who had become a nation's hope, her journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning.